There we go. There we go. About the authors.
Are we doing that?
James Cressey. James, the taxman Cressey, is the son of a Greek Orthodox man and a very unorthodox woman. They met in a betting shop in Stockton, near Newcastle upon Tyne, although they were both from a remote fishing village in France. They made Stockton their home and sold wooden toys to all the children in the northeast. James was supposed to take over the production of the toys, but he could not handle such hedonism. Today he works from home for a company that sells accounting software to small businesses.
Tom Williams. Contrary to popular belief, Tom Williams has never been to space. It's all a lie. He once looked at space from a far distance and decided to tell all his friends that he'd been there. He will stand by this lie until the end of his days. Born in 1963, Tom grew up in Basford Green outside Stoke-on-Trent, but hasn't visited Staffordshire this side of the millennium. It's the year 2000. He currently lives with his wife and someone else's 2 children in a hut at the point where the A34 crosses the A303, and Tom is made of clay.
Space. It is set in space by James Cressey or Tom Williams. Illustrated by Callum Winter and James Cressey.
Sir Dave Benson Phillips. Prologue. Over to you, Tom.
Shall I start, or do you want to?
No, you go for
it. Okay. In a dark part of space, right in the corner by some old forgotten moons without planets, and a couple of mouldy, out-of-date nebulae, an absolutely massive spaceship was floating. It was huge, bigger than anything that you or I have ever seen. It was an obscenely big spaceship. If you were to walk the full length of this ship, you would be walking for flipping ages. It was bigger than your average planet, considering mean, mode, and median. It was so huge that to see the whole thing with the naked eye meant being really far away from it. To get to this distance, you'd have to travel through space for hundreds of years, by which point you and your naked eye would be dead. If you haven't yet fully comprehended how incomprehensibly big this ship is, I, or we, urge you to reread this opening a few more times. Further to its ridiculous size, this spaceship was also chock-a-block full of aliens. Proper aliens. Green slimy ones with 8 eyes and tentacles.
Algan woke up with a start. Algan was a type of alien called a Jotaj, and something was not right with his Jotaj body. His left sucker was perked up. His left sucker was never normally perked up. It always hung down casually like a wet phonarch's nasal juice valves, the way it should. But this morning, it was well perked up. Algan panicked and thought to himself, I'd better see the ship's medic almost immediately. One problem with being on a very large spaceship, and I mean massive, see paragraph 1, is that it can take a very long time to get anywhere, especially when your left sucker is all perked up and you obviously can't use the transportation tubes for hygiene reasons and low gene considerations. It took Algan absolutely ages to get to the medical sector. The spaceship was really big, if you hadn't forgotten. And for Algan, right now, it felt even bigger. He did not need this today. Today was the day of his big test. He was to become a level 4 hatch monitor. And today, he was being tested on how to manage translucent and biobacterial ingest hatches. He'd been studying for this test for weeks, and during the last few days, he'd been as nervous as his mother had been on the day that Algan was born, which is understandable as Jotaj mothers commonly die in childbirth, a fact which results in the common mistake of people thinking that Jotaj mothers hate their children and simply can't stand to be around them. Not true. If you see a young Jotaj without its mother, it's most likely the mother is dead, or perhaps just not there at the time you're looking at them. It would make perfect sense to think that it was these nerves that led to Algan's left sucker being all perked up. Wrong. The real reason was much more important and or nefarious.
While using the doctor's waiting room for its intended purpose, Algan stared out of the window. thinking about how he was going to take his hatch monitor level 4 test if his left sucker was either still sticking up or in a cast. Embarrassing. A nurse walked in, whose suckers were completely fine. More than fine. But Algan didn't notice this. He was distracted. He saw something far away in the deep blackness of space. It looked like a small spaceship, but this was just perspective. Even though it was impossible for his eyes to be able to focus on something so far away, despite the fact that the eyes of a Jotaj are orders of magnitude better than those of a human, he felt as if someone, or something, was looking straight at him and his left sucker. Instantly, the spaceship was blown apart by this even bigger spaceship with an orange laser. This one was at least 3.5 times larger than the first one. Really massive. Algan's left sucker was now the least of his problems, as his body was occupying a much, much larger area of space than was possible for someone who was still alive. He, and everything that was on this really big ship we started off talking about, had been obliterated. This left just one question remaining. Why, and for what reason, did this happen?
And then a picture of Algan.
And then the caption is, well, that sucks.
Chapter 1, Saddest Goldplorks. A small space orb floated in front of him, whistling at a whisper's intensity. The orb was about the size of a pea and glowed a deep purple hue which became orange at its edges. It let off an incredibly faint smell that he'd smelt before but couldn't quite pin down. This orb was known as a Goldplorks, and they were a real nuisance. They were harmless creatures, really. Get 1 or 2 on your little ones on your skin or in your gills, and you could get an over-the-counter cream to reduce the swelling. But if you got yourself an infestation, then that's when the real problem started. You see, a Goldplorks had figured out that they were stronger when they worked as a team, and they had some pretty effective methods of invasion over the years. By far the most effective method of invasion was introducing a loving, married Goldplorks couple into the ventilation system of a foreign ship, and then having them reproduce until they could form a reasonably sized child army. I say married because the Goldplorks are very old-fashioned, and they wouldn't even hold hands until the 4th date.
When a child's Goldplorks army is large enough, they would then begin to spread through the ventilation systems of the ship and slowly engulf each crew member until they are nothing but vapor. Eventually, the whole crew would have evaporated, and the Goldplorks would have themselves a new ship. The only problem then is that they are too small to fly it, but the kick they get out of the exercise is well worth it. So, while he only had one of these small purple orbs hovering in front of his face, Horace turned ghost white. For you see, Horace was the ship's ventilation technician, and he knew a young Goldplorks when he saw one. Dun dun dun!
Captain Morph was a great... Oh, sorry, you got another paragraph, haven't you? Did you just do 2? Sorry, Tom, carry on.
I think we should start again. Okay. Captain Morph was a great seal of a man. Wet, grey skin, a great big belly, and whiskers. Horace rushed into his quarters, interrupting his morning snack of 6 Babybel jammed onto a skewer. This irritated the captain.
What the heck is going on? You look like you've seen a ghost, roared the captain, using a phrase that is very rarely used when someone has actually seen a ghost. Horace hadn't seen a ghost. He'd seen a Goldplorks. Horace didn't quite know how to break the news to the captain. This was Morph's first voyage back after his suspension, and he didn't have excellent self-esteem at the best of times. Knowing he'd allowed his ship to be overrun by Goldplorks was really going to get him down. Spit it out, Horace!
But before Horace could spit anything out, a humongous crash echoed from the ceiling of the room. It's Goldplorks, sir! We've been overrun by Goldplorks! But we have state-of-the-art Goldplorks detection systems in every vent.
Well, sir, they were state-of-the-art 20 years ago, but they're still running on Windows 95. I've been telling you we need to upgrade them in every meeting we've had for the last 10 years, as well as your superiors during your period of suspension. Goldblocks are very adaptive and good at reacting to change, which is why it's so important to keep our systems up to date. I said this would happen. The captain let out a sigh. You're right, Horace. Nobody could have predicted our systems would fail. It's nobody's fault.
Horace tried to interject, but was interrupted by a shrill voice echoing out from the computer on the captain's desk. It looks like you've been overrun by Goldblocks. Would you like me to destroy them? The Goldblocks detection system may have failed, but the captain had also failed to upgrade his personal computer from Windows 95 Intergalactic Edition. In a stroke of space luck, Clippy from Microsoft Office just happened to have a Goldblocks eradication feature built in.
Go ahead, Clippy, Horace grumbled. And with that, a huge fireball made its way through the ventilation system, killing every last Goldblocks dead. Clippy had finally been useful, or so they thought.
Dun dun dun.
Martin S. Ronson was a Goldblocks, yes, but he had no interest in killing. He was the most intelligent Goldblocks to ever have lived, so, obviously, also the saddest. While his friends were screaming, kill, 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 he was muttering under his breath phrases like, man, quantum physics is so interesting. Look how the mere act of measurement changes the outcome of reality. But nobody wanted to hear it. He had always felt unlike the rest of his species, like there was something different in his genes. He'd been feeling at his very lowest when he left the vent just before the war plan had been put into action, moments before everyone else had been engulfed by Clippy's fireball.
In fact, it was the presence of Martin S. Ronson that alerted Horace to the Goldblocks. So, ironically for this pacifist, he unwittingly caused the greatest number of casualties in the history of his species. Martin S. Ronson knew this, and for some reason it made him feel happier than he'd ever felt before. His mother and father had been pretty nice, all things considered, but they were really just two normal Goldblocks, hell-bent on infecting air vents the galaxy over. Martin S. Ronson dreamt of bigger and better things, and perhaps this would be his only chance to grab them with his tiny floating orb hands. He was finally free. He no longer had to endure being a mindless, floating, killing orb. He would be able to fly around the world thinking about quantum physics and try to make friends with other small spherical aliens who enjoyed pondering these things. Martin S. Ronson now had one sole desire. He would find his calling, and he would live his life to the full. He would be a help to those smaller than him and a friend to those bigger. He would single-handedly, which is extremely difficult for a floating orb, enlighten the world as to how nice and courteous a Goldblocks could be. With this thought in mind, he flew as fast as he could to the great ship's escape pod control room. He reached it in an acceptable amount of time, and with a flourish, Martin S. Ronson set the Windows 95 system to eject and hit run. A floppy disk ejected, which wasn't what he had intended, but he chucked the disk into the hatch all the same and floated in after it.
Back in the captain's quarters, all 5 of them, as he was a large beast, Captain Morph and Horace were reveling in the destruction of the Goldblocks army. You know, Harold. It's Horace, sir, replied Horace. Yes, well, I'm very pleased with how I handled that situation. It was very captainly of me.
Horace nodded. Here, have a baby bell, the captain continued. I could never have done it without the help of Clippy over here. Clippy was doing one of those little animations he does when you're not using him. Horace was very mild-mannered and did not like to blow his own figurative trumpet, so he just took a bite of the baby bell the captain had given him. This was the single nicest thing the captain had ever done for anyone who wasn't directly related to him. Dun, dun, dun. Horace's utilitarian trouser knee pocket began to vibrate. He ripped open the Velcro and pulled out the futuristic tablet he used to monitor the ship. For some ridiculous sci-fi reason, the screen was transparent. Horace had an auto message to say that one of the escape pods had been accessed without authorization. Horace was responsible for the escape pods as well as the air vents. He quickly flicked over to the corresponding camera. It was the same Goldblocks from before, flinging something into an escape pod and jumping in after it. Horace's fingers hovered over the lock button, which would securely shut off operations from the escape hatch and trap the Goldblocks in it. However, at this moment, Horace had a sudden change of heart. He realised that this Goldplork was a mere child, raised to do one thing, and one thing only: taking over spaceships and killing their crew, to recap, if you're slow. Yet here he was, jumping into an escape hatch, showing no sign of wanting to take over the ship through infestation.
"What is it, boy?" huffed Captain Morph. Nothing, Captain," replied Horace, swallowing a lie as well as his remaining baby bell. "I was just being alerted to the thousands of dead Goldplorks in the air vents." "Very well," replied the captain. "Enough chit-chat. You better go and clear up your mess."
Horace exited the captain's quarters and took another look at the video stream on the tablet. He could see the Goldplorks in the pod. "Space speed, little Goldplorks. I wish you all the best," he whispered. Dun, dun, dun. The pod released at terrific speed, with Martin F. Swanson safely aboard. It was the kind of it was a loud whisper. It was the kind of speed which looked really slow and quiet when you were far away in space, but something about the way it moves tells you that it's actually an outstanding velocity. The way a comet slowly glides through the air, or a Formula One car swerves around a corner, all part of the harmony that keeps this universe in check.
Martin S. Bronson was out. He was gone. He had left the ship where he'd been born, but the reality was that today he was starting his life. You may for some reason think that his part in this saga was over, but you would be sorely mistaken. So sorely mistaken that you'd need to use Savlon and plaster up your mistake. For Martin S. Bronson had a floppy disk. Martin S. Bronson had the floppy disk. And it's a picture of the computer where the floppy disk came out of, with some crazy alien language at the top.
And it says at the bottom, "A fatal error."
Chapter 2. There is a planet not far from space that has found itself in a right economical pickle. Due to a spelling mistake in the constitution of Dilligord 4, you are able to use whatever currency you like to pay for goods and services. Prices are simply presented as a number, and you can pay in whatever currency you have in your dirty little tartan-lined space pockets. It's not hard to see what an issue this is when you are trying to run a business on Dilligord 4. However, it does mean the number of bank heists are dramatically low.
Errol stood behind a shop counter. Errol sold a Yoffer. He sold a Yoffer by the kilo, and he got a lot of attention for it. The store was called "However You Pay, It's All Okay." It was a kind of store / cafe called a Knockabot store, selling all kinds of knickknacks and a few stale bags of actual knickknacks. It's a little known fact that knickknacks are a space delicacy, loved all over the universe for their odd shapes and tangy taste. In the early 60s, a bag of knickknacks fell to Earth, and the Tories attempted a huge cover-up to stop people asking too many questions on how knickknacks came to be. The cover-up was almost a complete success, in that knickknacks can now only be purchased at swimming pool vending machines in the UK. A young Jerin came into the store and asked Errol how long it would cost him for 2.34 kilos of Yoffer. "It's 12 for that much," Errol replied, scratching his bold, slimy, pulsating chin valve.
"For 2.3 kilo of Yoffer? You've got to be kidding me." Reluctantly, the Jerin handed over 12 eccles. He took the bag of Yoffer and put it in his Glartram sack, popped on his Surrogal space gloves, for it was cold outside, and made to walk out of the Knockerbox store. All the while there had been an Oliold sitting at one of the tables, pouring her Yoffer into her foul Yumelo tract. She piped up, 12 eccles? 12 eccles? I just paid 12 resacks for 1.89 kilos of this quite honestly substandard Yoffer. One resax is worth a whole lot more than one eckel." "Look here," replied Errol. "When you come to Dilligord 4, you learn to pay how the locals pay. It costs 12, 12 is what it costs. If you want to go to some other planet with its fancy economies and currencies and stock markets and exchange rates, then go there. But here, you pay 12. Errol tilted his titillating tube and turned away from the Oliold.
"I've lived on this planet for years. I know about the economy, and I know how it's exploited by people like you." Errol turned back to the Oliold. "Dilligord 4 years?" he asked.
Yes, still a good 4 years, you imbecile. Why would I be using another planet's timing systems? And what do you mean, people like you, said Aral. I mean, seethed the Oliold, fat, dirty, spleehay-nases.
She was getting really riled up now. The Oliold was well built, with broad shoulders that looked like they could hug you right up. She didn't hug that often, though. Her face was firm and squishy in all the right places. To the right person, she was beautiful. But to the wrong person, she was incredibly offensive. You never knew who you were until you saw her. What was the point of the Intergalactic Federal Cosmic Government Space Agency making contact and taking over this planet 65 years ago if you don't use Dilligord 4 years? Next thing, you'll be telling me that the town hall is only 1.5 miles away. Her face was going very green now. Green, as you know, is the colour Oliols go when they get angry, because on their home planet, blue, pink, and grey are the primary colours. Editor's note, check this. Also, the town hall was exactly 1.5 miles away.
This planet is chock full of absolute jimmer-jammers, she shouted. Aral almost fell back in shock. This was just too far for a Sunday afternoon, and it wasn't even Sunday. Get out of my shop, he roared out of his larger Ming hatch, his 2 reverse tentacles flailing wildly above him.
With a look of thunder, the Oliold stormed out of the store and made her way down the street to get the next ship back to her home planet with its strong economy and credit cards, breaking the one rule her father had sworn her to live by. As she walked down the street, she looked at the shop windows. She saw all sorts for sale. Yobbyths, Strethnoids, Bingjacks, Nemowixes, Toojits, Flizzhammers, Neolekef, and Neckmids, all with prices next to them. Numbers. Numbers which could be paid for with any kind of currency you had in your pocket. This backwards, inverted, crazy planet was really starting to get on her nerves. She had spent thousands of raysacks in the godforsaken years she'd been stationed here. She could have spent thousands of eccles, or thousands of Tonk symbols even. This enraged her. It really, really annoyed her. She was so seriously, actually miffed about it. And this planet should know by now that after everything that it and its government have been through in the past 16 years, that it was never a good idea to tick off the daughter of the king. That's right, the king.
Dun dun dun. There's a bit.
The shop.
However you pay, it's all okay.
However you pay, it's all okay. It's 6:30. We're going to call it there for the night.
Let's do one more.
One more what?
Chapter.
How long is the chapter? It's a long chapter. This.
Okay, no, let's leave it then.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it next time.
Okay.
Right. Third chapter.
Third chapter. Okay, we'll do the third chapter, then we'll finish.
Okay.
Third chapter. I'm okay with that.
Third chapter.
Okay, it's you. Sorry.
It's me. Yeah, no. I was breathing in to read. The feeling of freedom was starting to wear off. Martin S. Ronson had been in the escape pod for over 4 days. 4 days is a long time for anyone to be stuck in a small enclosed space, even in space where there are no clocks. I realised that 2 meanings of the word space are used here in the same sentence. Isn't the English language peculiar? Luckily, Martin S. Ronson is very small, so it could have been a lot worse, space-wise. He was bored, however.
Unfortunately, the floppy disk he had taken from Captain Morph's ship was incompatible with the escape pod computer. All he could do to pass the hours was wonder what and why it had fallen into his figurative hands. He tried staring at it for a really long period of time, hoping to see the ones and zeros at its core. He tried smelling it and even licking it, but to no avail. If you've ever found yourself stuck in an escape pod which is hurtling through space at really high speed, or been kept in solitary confinement for crimes which you won't be asked about, or had to endure the mind-numbing ramblings of the rambling mind-numbers from Centigal Vox, then you most likely don't know what it's like. It's boring. Martin S. Ronson had tried all sorts of things to keep himself entertained. He'd looked out the window at the view, which was big and black and empty. He played Minesweeper on the onboard computer for a while until he remembered it was a really dull game, and that the celebration animation that the little yellow face makes when you win really wasn't worth the effort. He'd even gone so far as to systematically and alphabetically name all 126 characters from his favourite TV show, Mothers of Czars Dance with the Stars. He'd even come up with his own business idea, milk by celebrities. Effectively, you get celebrities to milk some space cow and slap a huge price of the label on it. People will pay anything done by celebrities. Alas for Martin S. Ronson, not even these game-changing business opportunities were resolving his boredom.
This budding intergalactic adventurer was starting to form a plan, and top of his list of things to do to improve his life was to get a body to transform him from a little orb to a hot bipedal creature. He felt that without this, he may find it hard to move from budding intergalactic adventurer to a full-blown adventurer like Indiana Galactic Jones. Editor's note: was this a pun on intergalactic? I don't think it works. You may not know, or you may be able to hazard a guess, but it's quite hard to just get on and do things when you're a Goldplorks, let alone be taken seriously. When your whole existence is to be a small, floating orb with a deep purple hue that was slightly orange around the edges and gave off a faint smell of something that might be going off in the fridge, but it's not quite intense enough to work out what that exactly is. So you remove every item one at a time, gently sniffing to see if it's that particular item until the fridge is completely empty and smells fine, so you put everything else back in. Well, if that was your existence, you would find it rather difficult to become an intergalactic explorer too. The question was simple. How was he going to find this new body? The answer is simple too, really. With enough money, anything is possible in space.
In space, if you have enough money, you can pay to have dark matter inserted directly into your primary sensory valve, whether that be a celluli, an eye, a beak bladder, or an anus. You can buy 1,000 beautiful robots with large organs and have them explode on your command. In fact, for double that price, you can have 2,000 beautiful large robots with large organs explode on your command. With enough money, you can even buy an HD DVD, which is different to the Blu-ray, the format that won the high-definition optical disc format war of the early 2000s, of Shrek the Third, and have it converted into Betamax. You must get the picture. With enough money, you can pay for anything in space. If he arrived at a planet whose currency was worth less than his own, Martin S. Ronson was confident that he could get a body, a nice, big, functioning body that would prove very practical in his bid to live his life to the full. Unfortunately, his currency was almost worthless. So it was lucky then that his escape pod was heading straight towards that economic jewel of space that was Dilligord 4.
Martin S. Ronson started dreaming about his life with a lovely, functioning body. He dreamt about the kind of body he would have. He dreamt about muscular bodies with 3 eyes and large nipples, like on the adverts. He dreamt about a body so streamlined that people who tried to pick him up would drop him straight away, even though he was not slippery at all. He also dreamt about a body that was really good looking, but existed only in the second dimension, meaning if he turned to his side, he would disappear. It was this turning to the side and disappearing that awoke Martin S. Ronson from his daydream. His awakening was quickened by the fact that this escape pod was entering the atmosphere of Dilligord 4. It was tumbling and burning and rumbling at an incredibly distressing level. The whole pod was vibrating intensely, so intensely that at one point, for a whole 2 seconds, the vibrations formed a perfect resemblance to the opening notes of Madonna's 1983 hit, Lucky Star. Martin S. Ronson didn't even have time to think about how weird this was, as he was being flung left, right and centre, and left again, like a sentient bowling ball on a dance mat. A large parachute shot out of the back of the pod, and was filled with Dilligord 4 air. A sudden snap reduction in falling speed inflicted a very minor whiplash on Martin S. Ronson, but nonetheless he would try to claim some form of compensation from his space insurance eventually. To his great relief, his descent smooth, and he gracefully made his way down towards the planet's surface. Dun, dun, dun.
A consequence of space being so flipping big is that it is very common for large coincidences to form. Just think about the number of coincidences that you may experience going about your day. Oh, what a coincidence that you are in the cinema and so am I. Oh, what a coincidence that you like chocolate oranges and so do I.
Oh, what a coincidence that you were wearing the same dress as her. This last one wasn't much of a coincidence, but more to do with the fact that there was only one dress and two people, so they had to share. The coincidence here was not one that Martin S. Ronson or anyone nearby was aware of, but it still counts. The parachute was one of those novelty chutes that you get. You know the ones. The acquisitions manager on Captain Morph's ship had been a right joker. He had decided to have his face printed on the parachute. It is believed that a similar thing had happened on the Titanic. In both instances, this was a result of the acquisitions manager thinking that they would never actually need to use the escape pod or parachute. In defense of the one on the Titanic, no one did use a parachute in the end.
However, unlike the acquisitions manager of the Titanic, the acquisitions manager of Captain Morph's ship just so happened to look identical to the presenter of 90s children's television show Get Your Own Back, Sir Dave Benson Phillips. So Martin S. Ronson, who was no longer being flung all over the place, braced for impact as he floated through the sky in his escape pod, supported by a massive parachute with Sir Dave Benson Phillips' face on it. If we were ever to make this book into a film, which I'm sure we will have been assured that Sir Dave Benson Phillips has a reasonable day rate. The impact was short but sweet. It was short because it only took a few moments, and it was sweet because landing on an alien planet is really badass. Martin S. Ronson slammed the big blue button labelled Open Air Hatch. The air hatch opened. The Goldclocks breathed in its first breath of Dilligord 4 air and floated out onto the planet. He was bloody lucky that all Goldclocks children are legally required to be immunised. Common sense is popular among Goldclocks parents. Despite being born on Captain Morph's ship, Martin S. Ronson had of course seen other planets on television. However, even the power of television has not prepared him for the wonders he was encountering on his first day here. There were snorkel flarts and rumpelbacks trailing the streets for food. There were Fantaluzza and rabbits wandering around looking for love. There was a handsome man trying to sell a marrow to a pretty girl. There was ludicrously named aliens on every street of the city, and Martin S. Ronson was loving it. His little orb-like eyes were well and truly boggling.
I just think there's a lot of this chapter left.
Yeah, we should. Is there a dun 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 coming up?
Let's have a look. No.
No, let's leave it there because it's just landed.
Yeah, we'll leave it there for today.